small town in Ohio. And it was wintertime, and it had snowed recently, so there were huge snowdrifts on the street. I was walking with my sister. Now, my sister was dressed. Years ago, a man named Edward Snowden.
Do you mind if I do that joke? I just want to borrow it. Now, I'm a kid. I don't know any better. I'm like, borrow it? Well, I guess, sure, if it'll help your career.
Saturday Night Live, the first episode after the election. And I was like, nah, man, I'm cool.
$50 million. That was the check Dave Chappelle had in his hand. $50 million to continue doing the most popular TV show in America. And he simply said no, turned his back, and disappeared. Went to Africa. Left Hollywood in shock, the media in panic, and the whole world asking, did this guy go crazy? Today, almost 20 years later, Dave Chappelle not only proved he was right, but became the highest-paid comedian on the planet, one of the most influential artists alive, and someone who completely redefined what it means to have integrity in the entertainment industry. How the hell did this happen? If you stay until the end of this video, you'll understand not only the most fascinating story of artistic autonomy you've ever heard, but you'll also discover why sometimes saying no to money is the most profitable decision you can make. And look, if you've never watched a Dave Chappelle special, you're literally missing the greatest genius of modern comedy. So stick around, subscribe to this channel right now, turn on notifications because every week I bring stories of people who defied the system and won on their own terms, and I guarantee you won't want to miss the next one. Now tell me something quick. Have you ever watched Chappelle's show? Have you seen any of his Netflix specials? Comment down below because I bet after this video you're going to want to binge everything. And if you're already a fan, comment too so we know there are people with good taste here. All right, now sit down because this story is absolutely insane. Washington, D.C., the 80s. Dave Chappelle is born into a family that was already different from the start. We're not talking about poverty or struggling for basic survival like many black comedians of that era. No, Dave came from an intellectual, progressive environment full of political consciousness. His father was a university professor. His mother was also a professor and political activist. They were educated, engaged people who talked about politics, about race, about society at the dinner table. And this completely shaped who Dave would become. He didn't just grow up absorbing black street culture. He grew up understanding theory, historical context, the power structures that govern America. And at the same time, he divided his childhood between Washington and Yellow Springs, Ohio, a tiny town predominantly white, where he was constantly reminded that he was different, that he didn't fit perfectly into any world. This duality, this being between two worlds without completely belonging to either, would become the essence of Dave Chappelle's humor. He could see America both from the inside and outside, could understand both the white and black perspective, could navigate between different realities, and expose the contradictions, the absurdities, the hypocrisy that existed in all of them. And man, he discovered this early. At just 14 years old, Dave was already getting on comedy stages in Washington, making adults laugh, proving he had something special. While other kids his age were worried about video games and soccer, Dave was studying Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, George Carlin, dissecting what made a joke work, understanding timing, understanding how to use humor to say truths that would otherwise be impossible to express. In the early 90s, Dave made the decision that would change everything. He moved to New York to pursue comedy professionally, and New York at that time was the absolute center of American stand-up. The biggest comedy clubs in the country were there. The most important agents, TV producers, everything happened in New York. And Dave, still a teenager, was there competing with comedians decades older, more experienced. But he had something the others didn't have, a completely unique voice. He wasn't trying to be the next version of anyone. He was simply Dave Chappelle. With his calm way of speaking, his sharp observations about race and culture, his ability to make you laugh while simultaneously making you think. And Hollywood noticed. He quickly started getting roles in films. Robin Hood Men in Tights in 1993, The Nutty Professor in 96, and Half-Baked in 98, which he also wrote. These films gave Dave exposure, money, recognition. But he was frustrated, because Hollywood wanted to put him in boxes, wanted him to play the role of the funny black comedian, the comic relief, the secondary character who exists just to make the white protagonist look cool. And Dave knew he was much more than that he had much more to say, that his talent was being wasted in roles that meant nothing. So in 2003, Dave Chappelle did something revolutionary. He created Chappelle's Show for Comedy Central. And man, this show absolutely changed everything. It wasn't just another comedy show, it was social commentary, disguised as entertainment. It was racial criticism presented through hilarious sketches. It was Dave using humor as a scalpel to dissect America and expose all its open wounds. He created characters and situations that became instantly iconic. The sketch about Clayton Bigsby, a blind white supremacist who didn't know he was black. The Rick James sketch that became a meme before memes were really a thing. The discussions about historical reparations, about racial stereotypes, about the music industry exploiting black artists. All of this wrapped in comedy, so intelligent and funny that people from all backgrounds were watching, laughing and being forced to confront uncomfortable truths about American society. Chappelle's Show exploded. It became an instant cultural phenomenon. Everyone was watching, everyone was quoting, everyone was talking. The ratings were massive, critics were amazed. Dave Chappelle became one of the most famous people in America practically overnight. And then Comedy Central came with a proposal, $50 million for 2 more seasons, $50 million. For a comedian who had grown up comfortable but not rich, who had spent years fighting to be recognized, this was money that would change his life forever, that would guarantee financial security for him and his family for generations. Any rational person would have signed that contract without thinking twice. Dave Chappelle said no. And not just said no, he literally disappeared. In the middle of production of the 3rd season, he simply stopped showing up, stopped answering calls, and suddenly was in South Africa. The media went crazy. The headlines were apocalyptic. Dave Chappelle had a nervous breakdown. Dave Chappelle is on drugs. Dave Chappelle went insane. Comedy Central was desperate. Executives were furious. Fans were confused. How can someone simply abandon $50 million? This doesn't make sense. Nobody does this. Nobody sane, nobody rational simply turns their back on this kind of money. But Dave wasn't crazy. Dave was doing the sanest thing possible. Because what was happening behind the cameras was something the public didn't see. Dave was realizing he was losing control over his own art. He was seeing people laugh at his jokes for the wrong reasons. He created a character to satirize racial stereotypes and saw white people laughing, not because they understood the criticism, but because they were genuinely enjoying the stereotype itself. He was seeing his art being used in ways he never intended, was feeling that instead of challenging racism, he might be inadvertently reinforcing it. And more than that, he was feeling the relentless pressure of fame, the loss of privacy, the transformation of his life into a commodity, the fact that he was no longer a person, but a product that Comedy Central owned and controlled. So Dave made the bravest choice of his life. He chose his mental sanity over money. He chose his artistic integrity over success. He chose to own himself even if it meant losing everything he had built. And man, this decision was ridiculed at the time. People called Dave crazy, irresponsible, weak for not handling the pressure. But Dave knew something most people take a lifetime to learn, that no amount of money is worth your soul, that success that destroys you isn't real success, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop. After leaving Chappelle's show, Dave practically disappeared from the media for years. He permanently settled in Yellow Springs, Ohio, this tiny town of only 6,000 people, raised his kids away from the spotlight, lived a relatively normal life. But he didn't stop doing comedy. He continued performing, but in a completely different way. He'd show up by surprise at small clubs, did intimate shows, reconnected with what had made him fall in love with comedy in the first place, the direct and human connection with an audience, without cameras, without executives, without pressure from ratings and advertisers. It was Dave doing comedy for the right reason, because he loved it, because he had something to say, not because someone was paying millions for him to do it. And during these years in the wilderness, something interesting happened. Dave's reputation grew, because people started to understand that what he had done wasn't madness, it was principle. He had sacrificed everything for integrity, and in a world where everyone seems willing to sell anything for money or fame, that was radically refreshing. Dave became a legend, not despite leaving the show, but because of it. He proved it was possible to say no to the system, that you could maintain artistic autonomy even when everyone is trying to buy you. And then came the return. In 2017, Dave Chappelle signed a deal with Netflix. It wasn't just one special, it was multiple specials, and the value of the contract was reported as $60 million. Let that sink in for a second. Dave had refused $50 million from Comedy Central because that would come with strings attached, with loss of control, with compromise of his vision. Now he was getting more money, but this time on his terms. Netflix gave Dave complete creative control. They said, do whatever you want, however you want, without interference, and that changed everything. The Netflix specials, Age of Spin, Deep in the Heart of Texas, Equanimity, The Bird Revelation, Sticks and Stones, and finally The Closer, redefined what stand-up comedy could be. They weren't just jokes, they were philosophical manifestos, they were Dave processing decades of experience. They were deep meditations on race, power, fame, media, culture, identity. Dave was doing comedy that worked on multiple levels simultaneously. You could watch casually and laugh at the surface jokes, or you could really pay attention and notice the layers of meaning, the connections he was making, the truths he was revealing through humor. And the audience responded massively. The specials broke viewership records. Dave won multiple Emmys, won the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, the most prestigious award in American comedy. He proved undeniably that you don't need to compromise your vision to have commercial success, that in fact maintaining your artistic integrity is exactly what makes you valuable. Dave Chappelle became the highest-paid comedian in the world, not despite abandoning $50 million, but because he had the courage to do it. But with this triumphant return also came controversies. Because Dave Chappelle, now at the height of his power, wasn't interested in doing safe comedy. He dove headfirst into all the topics people said comedians shouldn't touch: gender identity, LGBTQ community, cancel culture, everything. And especially in The Closer, his most recent and controversial special, Dave made jokes about trans people that caused massive outrage. Netflix employees went on strike demanding the special be removed. Activists accused him of transphobia. Articles were written attacking him, trying to cancel him. And here's where the story gets really interesting. Because Dave didn't back down. He didn't apologize, didn't edit the material, didn't promise to do differently in the future. Instead, he doubled down. He publicly defended that comedy should be able to touch any subject, that the comedian's job isn't to make people feel comfortable, but to make them think. That if we start censoring art because some people feel offended, we lose something fundamental about freedom of expression. Dave argued that he's not transphobic, that he's criticizing specific aspects of trans activism and cancel culture, not attacking the existence or humanity of trans people. And most importantly, he refused to let Twitter mobs and newspaper headlines dictate what he can or can't say on stage. This stance divided people deeply. There are people who see Dave as a hero defending artistic freedom against tyranny of a vocal minority. There are people who see Dave as someone using his massive platform to attack an already marginalized community. And this is exactly the tension that defines Dave Chappelle. He exists in this uncomfortable space where there are no easy answers, where you're forced to think, to question your own certainties, to deal with complexity. Dave doesn't let you simply agree or disagree completely. He forces you to engage with nuance, with contradiction, with the fact that difficult questions don't have simple solutions. And look, regardless of where you fall in this debate, one thing is undeniable. Dave Chappelle is doing exactly what comedians should do. He's provoking conversations, he's challenging orthodoxies, he's refusing to be domesticated. He's not doing comedy to please everyone. He's doing comedy to say what he believes to be true, even when that makes some people furious. And in an era where most artists are terrified of offending someone, where everyone is calculating every word through multiple lenses of possible outrage, Dave Chappelle remains gloriously, stubbornly, courageously free. But there's another dimension to Dave's story that can't be ignored: his relationship with Yellow Springs. While most celebrities at his level live in mansions in Los Angeles or New York, surrounded by other celebrities, isolated from real life, Dave chose to live in a tiny town in the middle of Ohio. He goes to the local market, interacts with neighbors, his kids go to the town's public schools, and it's not just that he lives there, he actively invests in the community, supports local businesses, gets involved in municipal issues. During the pandemic, Dave transformed a golf course into an outdoor concert venue, brought some of the biggest names in comedy to perform, gave the town a source of entertainment and economy when everything was shut down. This choice to live in Yellow Springs isn't accidental. It's fundamental to who Dave is. Because Dave understands that connection with real community, with real people who aren't in the entertainment industry, is what keeps you honest, what prevents you from floating into some bubble of distorted reality that celebrities often inhabit. Dave chose to remain grounded, remain connected to real America, not the fantasy version that exists in Hollywood. And this informs his work. This is why his comedy still resonates, why he still understands what normal people are thinking and feeling, instead of just reflecting the concerns of a disconnected cultural elite. And there's also the racial dimension of this whole story that's absolutely central. Dave Chappelle is a black man doing comedy in a country with a deeply racist history, in an industry that has historically exploited black artists. And Dave is extremely conscious of this. Part of the reason he left Chappelle's show was exactly because he saw the historical patterns of Hollywood, taking black talent, extracting value from it, maintaining control, and then discarding the artists when they're no longer profitable. Dave refused to be another iteration of this story. He refused to be owned, controlled, exploited. And by doing this, he not only freed himself, he paved the way for other black artists to demand better, to demand control over their own work, to demand to be treated as creative partners and not as commodities. Dave frequently talks about this in his specials, about the history of black artists being robbed, being paid a fraction of what they deserved, while white executives kept most of the profits. He tells the story of how Comedy Central was making hundreds of millions of dollars with Chappelle's show in merchandising, DVD sales, licensing, and Dave wasn't seeing a penny of it because he didn't own the rights to the show. This ate at him, the fact that his work, his creativity, his genius were generating fortunes for other people while he was treated as a disposable employee. And eventually, through public pressure and negotiations, Dave got Comedy Central and other platforms to stop licensing the show, effectively taking it out of circulation until he received fair compensation. It was a symbolic and practical victory, proving that artists can fight back against corporate machines and win. Now let's talk about his technique, because Dave Chappelle isn't just a provocative comedian, he's a master craftsman of stand-up. If you really pay attention, you notice extraordinary things about how he works. First, Dave has one of the best voices in comedy. Not literally his speaking voice, although that characteristic raspy tone is part of it, but his artistic voice, his unique point of view. When Dave speaks, you know immediately it's him. Second, he's a phenomenal storyteller. He builds long and complex stories with multiple characters, with detours and digressions that seem random, but always connect back to the main point. He takes you on journeys, doesn't just give you quick jokes. Third, He has impeccable timing, knowing exactly when to pause, when to speed up, when to let a silence do the work. And there's something else that separates Dave. He laughs at his own jokes. In most comedy schools, they teach you never to do that, to keep a straight face, to let the joke speak for itself. But Dave breaks that rule constantly, and it works perfectly because it seems genuine. He's clearly having fun, is finding real humor in the things he's saying, and that joy is contagious. You're not just laughing at the jokes, you're laughing with Dave, sharing a moment of real human connection. So when you put it all together, exceptional talent with moral courage, with political intelligence, with radical authenticity, with refusal to compromise, you have something truly special. You have an artist who transcends entertainment and becomes culturally essential. Dave Chappelle isn't just someone who makes you laugh, he's someone who makes you think, who challenges you, who forces you to confront uncomfortable things, who refuses to let you settle into any simplistic ideology. And look where he is now compared to where he was in 2005. In 2005, he was being called crazy for abandoning 50 million. Today, he's universally recognized as one of the greatest living artists, not just in comedy, but in any field. He proved you can have massive commercial success without selling your soul, that you can be controversial and still be loved, that you can challenge the status quo and not just survive, but thrive. Dave Chappelle took all the rules Hollywood tells you have to follow, all the concessions they say are necessary, and threw them in the trash. And he won by doing it. The lesson of Dave Chappelle's story isn't just about comedy, it's about life. It's about how you choose to operate in the world. It's about knowing who you are and refusing to be anything else, even when the rewards for compromising are tempting. It's about understanding that autonomy, freedom, integrity are worth more than any check someone can offer you. It's about having the courage to bet on yourself when everyone is telling you you're wrong. And it's about recognizing that real success isn't defined by how much money you have or how famous you are, but by how much you can stay true to yourself while achieving your goals. Dave Chappelle lived this more dramatically and publicly than most of us will ever live. But the principles apply universally. We all face moments where we have to choose between what's easy and what's right, between what's profitable and what's true. Dave's story shows us that choosing the harder path, the path that keeps your integrity intact, isn't just possible but can lead to the most extraordinary results. So if you didn't know Dave Chappelle, now you do. And if you knew him but had never thought deeply about what makes his story so fascinating, I hope you now have a new appreciation. Go watch his specials on Netflix. Start with Sticks and Stones or The Closer if you want the most recent and provocative Dave, or go back to Age of Spin if you want something a bit more accessible. Experience his genius firsthand. And now tell me in the comments, have you watched Dave Chappelle? What do you think about the controversies around him? Would you have had the courage to abandon $50 million? And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, because every week I bring stories like this, of people who defied the system and redefined what success means. Until next time.